Hi there, and welcome to a new episode, a new knitting episode on this channel. If you're new here, or if you're a returning viewer, I heartily welcome you, and I'm so glad you're here. My name is Helle, and I'm coming to you from the city of Odense in Denmark. And I've got a few things lined up for you today. It has a little unintentionally turned into a kind of watercolory theme in connection with my finished object, with my work in progress, and with some acquisitions that I just got in Paris last week. And I'll go through, of course, my finished object and my work in progress. And then there's going to be a little Paris segment because I cast on my work in progress in Paris and worked a little on it there. And there's a little segment from the yarn shop that I visited in Paris where I got my tiny, I think, modest acquisition. So that's pretty much the program for today. I hope you'll enjoy it. Maybe there'll be a little bit about the Knitalong towards the very end. And as you'll notice, the light is changing here all the time. I was planning on recording outside, but I felt there was a bit of wind. And the choice was to sit outside and enjoy the air and the birds, etc. But maybe the sound would be a little off every now and then. And I know people are really into being able to hear clearly, and I can understand that. So I felt I opted for the safer option. I will go outside if it's ever possible, but in the Paris segment, I'm actually sitting outside at the Castle of Versailles, knitting. How crazy is that? Okay, but of course, I can't start an episode without a little quote. So I've got one that seems to fit my finished object, I feel. If you've heard of the American philosopher John Dewey, he said learning by doing, or learning by Dewey, as some people call it. And actually, Aristotle, whom I mentioned previously, seemed to have a forerunner of that 2,000 years ago. And I think it's relevant for us as knitters. It's certainly, as I said, relevant for me in this finished object. Anyway, he said, for the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. But since I was just in Paris last week, as a travel guide, by the way, I wanted to include a quote by a French philosopher, Voltaire, and I seem to recall doing an exam on Voltaire years ago. So I found a quote that I think is really lovely by him. I had to think about it for a second. And I think it's also something we can all use in knitting and in life. He said, "Appreciation is a wonderful thing. It makes what is excellent in others belong to us as well." So I think if we can open our hearts to appreciating others, whether it's what they do or simply what they are, by extension, we can have that too. It's not a question of them having more or being more than us. It's sort of we're joining in it. You know, I think it's another way of believing in abundance rather than scarcity. And that's certainly something I try to practice. It's not always easy, but I think we should try to practice it anyway. On that note, let's see if you can appreciate my latest finished object here. I certainly can, let me tell you. It's, of course, the Snow Crocus by Midori Hirose. And I'll show you a little clip of me from further away where I'm wearing it. I can also tell you right now, it's pretty hot to wear it right now because it's still kind of summery in Denmark. It's probably about 20 degrees outside, so this is warm. I may not be able to wear it during the whole episode. If you've been here before, you will have heard about this a lot. I'm here to tell you it's done. It's finished, and I'm so grateful for that. It did take quite a bit of perseverance and patience and discipline, and I think also acceptance that I was facing my own limitations, which is sometimes not so easy, but it's all the more satisfying when you then overcome them, I feel. The yarn, as I've talked about before, is a combination of a merino and a silk mohair in these two vibrant colors that strangely create this more smoky, muted color. And as many of you pointed out, it really is strange and weird and magical. And it makes you wonder what other options are out there. It doesn't create a highly contrasty, marred look. It's sort of, it's like the green creates this haze over the purple and also changes the color. I don't know how it happens. I mean, magic, of course, is what can't be explained. So I don't know. It's Mominoki yarn, a Japanese yarn brand. And I initially bought the yarn at Loop of London, but they no longer carry it as far as I can see. I began the sweater back in February. And before I went to Paris, I was almost done knitting it. I think I only had about this much of the hem left, and then I ran out of the silk mohair. The reason why I did that is that I made some modifications, which I'll get back to. But I had to order more yarn, and of course that yarn didn't get here until I was in Paris. So I had to wait patiently to finish it and also accept that I was ordering another skein of yarn simply for 4 centimeters or a couple of inches, not even. And that's how it is sometimes. And, I was fine with that. It was okay. This time I ordered it from the Mominoki shop in Berlin. And it was here within a few days. And for me, the postage was reasonable and there was no value-added tax, which was also lovely. I knitted it on needle sizes 5 and 6. So 5 is only for the neck and for the cuffs and the ribbing at the hem. And the rest is on 6mm needles, which is, I think, US 10. So it's a pretty big gauge and pretty big needles. But that didn't mean, in this case, for me, that it went fast. And the reason for that is that, as I've talked about before, it's, to me, a very complex pattern. This is my printout version of the pattern. Yeah. And one thing that I want to make sure to mention is that I think I've been complaining a little at how difficult it was and how complex and all the pages. And yes, it does require some focus and discipline. But also, when there's something you can't do and you see that others have been able to do it, your instinct should not be to, I feel, to complain about the pattern. And I see people doing it all the time. I've done it myself. But when you see others being able to accomplish it, surely it's probably due to your own limitations or something. I haven't been used to knitting a pattern like this, but now I've tried it and I feel quite proud of myself. It's like I've upgraded my knitting game a little with this pattern, and you certainly cannot falter for lack of details. And, I think because I come from Denmark and we're used to having all these knitting patterns that are perhaps more simple, more minimalistic, sometimes bordering even on being knitting recipes where your hand is not being held at all, then suddenly trying something like this, a Japanese pattern where there's so many details, can be a little challenging. But this is the way they prefer, or some Japanese designers prefer to make the patterns. You just really have to figure out your size, and then maybe I've seen other people write to me that what they did was they converted the document of the pattern into some kind of Word document where they could edit it, and then they pulled out everything for their size and made a separate document for that. Now, had I been able to do that, I probably would have done that. Although, let me move into the modifications, because I knitted the size M2, which is actually the 5th size out of 11 sizes, which is a little unusual for me. Usually I'll knit the 2nd or 3rd size, sometimes the 1st size if it's an oversized sweater. So here I knitted one of the middle sizes. There are 11 sizes in all. And the reason why is that I was first drawn to the sweater when I saw it on this gorgeous red-headed model that to me looked a little like Tilda Swinton, that sort of androgynous, sort of fluid beauty. And she wore a version of the Snow Crocus that to me was a little oversized, a little baggy, where there's quite a bit of room here and also on the back and here on the sleeves. And that was the version I wanted. I've since seen people's versions on Ravelry where they're rather more snug and fitted. And, that's fine. I can also see that picture in the pattern with that, but I didn't want that. So what I would have preferred for the pattern, and which I like in other patterns, is, how when you buy clothes from a store and you're looking at a picture of a model and you're wondering, well, she looks like she's maybe a size or two smaller than me, which means if she's wearing a size whatever, I'll go for that size. Here I would have liked if it had said in the pattern or on the page on Ravelry or somewhere what size the model was wearing, because I think even though she looks like she's a size extra small, her body, it looks to me as if she's wearing a size large, maybe even extra large. So that's probably also why I ran into problems when I got to the sleeves, although I don't have very thin arms, so that could also be it. And also, as some of you pointed out, sometimes you knit more tightly when you begin knitting the sleeves, so I could have also gone up a needle size. I don't think that would have been enough, so I would still have had to cast on more stitches for the sleeves, which is what I ultimately did. Part of the problem could also have been that, as I recall, I knitted the swatch in the moss stitch. And of course, once you do cables like here and here, the fabric contracts a little bit. Maybe not so much when these aren't the really twisty cables, but still, I'm not sure. I think I have a tendency to knit more tightly when I make a swatch. And I don't actually recall if I knitted the swatch in the round. Maybe I didn't. I have done so since. Because once you figure that out, I was to here, and then I thought, okay, this sleeve is way too tight. So I unraveled, and then I picked up 8 more stitches, which doesn't perhaps sound like much, but now I forget. But there's a certain number you have to have on either side of the middle of the underarm, and it had to be either 4 or 8 or more. And I figured 8 would be just about enough, and I'm quite pleased with it. This is pretty much the look I wanted, so it's baggier and creates the slightly balloony effect that I was going for without being huge sleeves. And I also really like the drape that is created here because of the sleeves, the construction of the sleeves, and because you have extra fabric. So of course, once I'd cast on the extra 8 stitches here and was done knitting the sleeves, which in this pattern, by the way, are knitted before the body, so you're not really on Sleeve Island. You're done with the sleeves. And I often actually finish at least one sleeve before I continue with the body, because I find that I like looking at the garment with the sleeves in order to assess how long I want it on my body. So once I began the body, of course I had more stitches here because I'd cast on more stitches for the sleeves, and you pick up along the sleeves for the body. And I thought, well, is it going to be too wide then? Will I have to maybe decrease? And I ended up not doing it. I measured it against one of my sweaters that's also a little baggy, and it was pretty much the same. So actually this was originally an M2. I think now with the measurements, I'm up to a large. So that's what I mean about the picture that the model is wearing. So even though there are 11 sizes, the largest is not actually all that large. But as you can tell with this, you can modify it and create it even larger if you wish, I think. I also talked about letter markers. I think you can see it in one of my previous videos where I talk about this sweater, because there are stitch markers between each section here, around this section, this, and then over here. And each section is then called something. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then again on the back. And that was a little, I'm not sure if it was tricky exactly, but I made little notes where I wrote the letter on and clipped it onto my little light bulb stitch marker. So I knew, okay, where was I? Where am I in the pattern? Because in the beginning, I wasn't familiar with the pattern. It wasn't intuitive at all. However, by the time that I was down to here and I'd knitted the top part and I had to continue with the body, I actually pulled out the stitch markers and I didn't need them anymore. And I chose to add them to make sure that I was in the right place. And it depends on what kind of knitter you are. I like knowing that I'm in the right place, but I also don't mind unraveling if I find out I've done something wrong. It was just, for me, better safe than sorry. Oh, yeah, since I had the 8 stitches extra here and 8 stitches extra here, it meant that I had 16 stitches extra on the body. And since I was using a size 6mm or US 10, it was quite a bit. But, you know, I would have had to add them if I hadn't done it, because otherwise I wouldn't have had the fit that I wanted. Also, when I got down to here, you are supposed to switch to the 5mm or US 8 when you begin here, and then knit the cuff. And I was thinking, I first changed immediately to the 5mm, and then and then you're supposed to decrease, I forget how much. But I actually decreased to the number of stitches that was in the M2 size that I was supposed to be knitting. And I finished the cuff and tried that on, and I felt it was too tight. So, you know, I think, I don't know, Japanese people clearly have a lot thinner arms than I do. I just don't have very thin arms, apparently. But so what I did was I let it be, and then when I was finishing the other sleeve, I waited a little. I decreased still with the size 6mm. No, what you're supposed to do. No, what I did was I decreased and I went down to a 5.5mm. And I kept the number of stitches for the larger size, which was presumably a large. And then I knit it down using the 5mm, and that was better. So it's still tight. Of course, I'm also a tight knitter, so that has to be taken into account. And what I did was I looked at people's pictures on Ravelry and Instagram, and I sort of made it bigger to see how pulled out was their ribbing. Was it pretty sort of even, you know, as if it was lying flat, or was it sort of pulled out? Because I didn't want that. That would simply be too uncomfortable. So I wanted the cinched in effect, but I also wanted it to be relatively comfortable. And it is. This is pretty much what I was going for. So I'm not sure if I'm going to remember to add all those modifications on Ravelry. I'll try. And of course, it's not, you know, maybe they're not relevant to you at all, because maybe you want a different fit. Maybe you're not going to knit it at all. Also, the pattern tells you to do a stretchy bind off. I think it links to a video, you know, the Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. And I used that both for the cuffs and at the bottom of the hem. However, I think that bind off is where you do a yarn over before casting off a stitch, or you cast off in ribbing. So knit, purl, and then you add a yarn over between the stitches. I only added a yarn over before the knit stitches, so it was sort of a combination between an ordinary bind off and the stretchy bind off, because I didn't want it, I was afraid it would flare, especially for the bottom. And hopefully you'll be able to see in the clip that I inserted that I think the bottom, it was pretty much exactly the way I wanted. And I was a little in doubt whether I should add more length, unravel the ribbing, or whatever. So I looked really closely at one of those pictures where you can see the model from behind, and I wanted pretty much that type of ribbing and that type of finishing cast off edge. So I tried, you know, casting off, and first I thought, is this a little too tight? And I unraveled, and then I did the bind off and really checked my stitches every time. And that seemed to work. Something that I found many times, which I'm sure many of you know, when I joined the body and the stitches for the sleeves, there came a little hole. And I used to just sort of seam that up previously. Now I don't want to do that. Now I want it to be done when I'm done. For one thing, it's easier, it's more fulfilling or satisfying when you're done. For another, it looks neater. So what I did was I pulled the stitch from below and added it to the stitch above, right where the hole was, and just knitted them together. And it's an old trick. I think everybody probably knows it. But in case there's one person out there who didn't, there's that. Okay, I'm going to step off camera just for a sec because this is getting way too hot. Excuse me. Okay, I'm back, and this is decidedly cooler, I have to say. It's simply not fall here yet in Denmark. It's been so hot. Not as hot as Paris last week. That was 34 degrees Celsius and people were melting. Oh, another little detail here. I tend to do this. I make a little bow in the neck with the yarn to make sure that I can tell what the back of the sweater is. Here you can see the bind off. It's pretty even, and it falls nicely without flaring, which is, as I said, what I was going for. Actually, what I did was I took a photo of these two yarns lying next to each other and made it black and white to see what the contrast was like, because I thought, well, maybe they're actually very similar in terms of sort of intensity or whatever it is. And that's why they marl so well. But no, they were still quite different. This was much darker. So I'm not sure what the deal is here. I would love to recreate it. I just want to say this is Merino Light from Momonoke yarn. This is the silk mohair. And this is not too scratchy for me, but it's not super soft either, even though it's merino. But there you go. That's me and my sensitive skin. I will live with it simply because I love it so much. I love the sweater. I love the design. I love the color so much. So I'll live with it. And I love the collar. It's kind of I don't know, is it a funnel neck or what is it? It doesn't come too close to my neck, so it works. Oh, by the way, I was watching The Witcher on Netflix. I watched quite a lot of episodes while knitting on this, also pausing quite a bit when I had to focus and look at the pattern. But when I got to this part and the sleeves, I could cruise for a long time. And I watched The Witcher. It doesn't hold a candle to Game of Thrones, to my mind, but I still love the aesthetic of it. It's moody, and of course, I didn't mind looking at Henry Cavill at all, to be honest. So I feel that whole aesthetic is kind of, the sweater's kind of infused with that. It's so weird because once I put it on, I was reminded of scenes from that. I don't know if you've tried that. So weird. And the sweater to me is also a little moody, that sort of smoky, hazy, dusty color. I love those. Okay, so what you're going to be seeing now is the Paris segment, where I show you what I'm working on now, what I cast on, in order to be able to bring my knit with me. And I'll add a little bit of footage of Versailles, simply because it's Versailles. It's one of the most beautiful castles, certainly one of the biggest castles in the world. And it's not every day that I sit in the palace gardens and knit. So I just wanted to share that a little with you. Okay, so I'm sitting in the gardens of the Palace of Versailles, and I'm here with a group of 49 tourists. I've found a little bench in the far corner of the park to just chill a little, because it's hard work being a travel guide, I have to say. And I'm here with my knitting, which is of course why I'm filming this for you. This is not the most obvious thing to be knitting on in the heat. It's 32 degrees Celsius here, so it's been so hot. But I've cast on for The Weekender by Andre Maury. And I wanted to be knitting on something that was relatively simple, in conjunction with the Snow Crocus, which I will do at home because it's way too complex for taking it with me. So I've cast this on. and I think I'm going to like it. I've chosen to use the Busted Alpaca or Brushed Alpaca by Signet. And the reason is that I've had it lying around in my stash for a while. Andre's versions are made with Brooklyn Tweed Shelter, I think, or certainly a yarn by Brooklyn Tweed. So it wasn't perhaps the most obvious thing to use because this is a lot thicker. But then I saw Jackie from Cadyjaxknits do a lot of, and also Caitlin, it must be said, do a lot of different versions of the Weekender. And so I thought maybe I could use the brushed alpaca. So it's probably going to be a bit thicker than the original, but I think I'll manage because I've cast on for the smallest size. And I've used a tubular cast on so far, so you can see it's got this really nice edge where it rolls over, because even though the pattern doesn't tell me to do the 2 setup rows, it just tells you to do the tubular cast on and then do the purls and knits for a ribbed hem. But when I follow the link in the pattern to check the tubular cast on, Andre Mari shows the 2 setup rows where you do kind of you do a slip stitch with the yarn in front and then a knit through the back loop, and you do that on 2 rows, and it looks really nice when you do that. So I quite like that. So let's see. I don't think I'm going to have any more time to knit on it while in Paris because it's a heavy-duty program all the way through. But so far, I like this. Let me just show you the yarn. It's this blue-gray color that I've had in my stash for a while, and they stopped making this particular color a while back. I'm not sure why. To me, it's just very sort of foggy color, and I love the fluffy, fuzzy yarn here. It's very hot to knit with here in Paris, or Versailles today. And as I said, I haven't had a whole lot of time to knit, and it's also been pretty chaotic here today because apparently I didn't have the right tickets. So I'm just going to maybe show you a few clips from the garden and the palace. I didn't go in today to see much of what's inside because I saw all of it last year. I went straight for the garden, and also I have other company as well. I first bought an ice cream, strolled through the park all the way down here. I think I can see the palace from here. It's maybe about 1 kilometer away. I strolled all the way down to the back of the garden, or the very far end of the garden, and found this bench. So I'm just enjoying the calm, and I'm going to do a little bit of knitting and hopefully enjoy Paris a little more. The last day is tomorrow, and when I get home I will show you how far I've come with the Weekender. I will be knitting on it hopefully during the bus ride home, when there's little else to tell, because I've been talking about Versailles, the castle, this on the bus ride out here, and all the other things that we've seen, and I'm going to be talking very little on the way home, so hopefully I'll have time to knit. And also I think the Weekender is pretty simple, so that satisfied my need for a simple pattern. You can maybe hear people running and biking in the background. That's because I'm sitting in the public part of the park where you can actually enter for free. I'll likely spend another hour in here on the Weekender, and then I'll stroll quietly up towards the castle again. So thank you for joining me on this little part of the podcast, straight to you from the Versailles Gardens, and I think I'll do the rest of the podcast from when I'm back home. So I'm just gonna go back to my knitting here and chill out for another hour or so, and I'll see you back in Denmark. Okay, so since I got home, of course, I've gotten a little further with it. But first, let me show you the yarn up close. It's a yarn that I showed way back on a previous episode in this color that's sadly discontinued, which is why I bought it back then, because it was really cheap. It was like, let me see, about $6 per skein. or ball of yarn, but they only had 7 left. So you can tell this is a really cheap sweater. But I was, of course, limited in terms of patterns. So it's been sitting around for quite a while, and I'm not even sure I have enough for this. I will have to live with it if I can only make 3/4 length sleeves, or perhaps find another color that might work. I'm not hugely into that idea right now because I like this so much, but let's see. I love this color because it has this sort of, I don't know, to me it looks sort of like, it reminds me of rain or fog or something. And of course, this is completely unintentional, but I'm clearly into a theme here. So this is the bursted alpaca or brushed alpaca from Sandnes Garn, which I've knitted with before. I made the Frankie Genser early last year, which I've worn so much. It's soft for me, which is, I mean, already enough reason for me to get more of that yarn. They have a lot of really great colors too. And of course, it's quite affordable. It's also, I've been knitting so much using 2 strands for this one, for instance. It's quite nice for once to knit with just the 1 strand, and it already has the fuzz, so no need to add another strand for me. I'm using a 4.5 millimeter needle. No, I cast on with a 4.5 millimeter needle, and then I continued with the 5 millimeter. I think the pattern actually calls for, which is US 7 and 8. The pattern actually calls for US 9 or 5.5 millimeter, but I'm using a much thicker yarn. And if I was going to go down half a needle size or whole needle size, the pattern or the fabric would be quite dense, so I didn't really want that. Here I used a 5.5 millimeter, and I felt it was maybe just a little too loose. So I knew that maybe the sweet spot, or I suspected that the sweet spot would be 5. And I knew this because I'd taken notes, and I have a little notebook where if I remember, I'm behind right now, but if I remember, I add needle sizes and comments on yarn and things like that for reference, so I know what to do and what not to do in the future. And of course, the Weekender is a hugely popular pattern, so I'm adding nothing new except maybe knitting it in this particular yarn. And as I mentioned, I think in the Paris segment, the yarn reminds me a little bit of the Lamb and Kid in its sort of fluffiness. So I thought it would be okay for this pattern as well. And I think also previously I considered knitting some kind of puff sleeve sweater with it. And I'm like, nah, I wasn't really feeling that. I would still like something like that, but this one required a different kind of pattern, I felt. Maybe something a little more relaxed and slouchy, which of course the Weekender is. So I felt that was pretty perfect. And also, as I said, it was a good travel knit because once I had sort of cast on and could begin the body, I could just knit for a long time. And the interesting thing is, I cannot tell you how long I pondered what to bring as a travel knit. I knew I would be going to Paris by bus. I couldn't really knit much on the way down because I would have to sort of speak in the microphone to all the people sitting behind me. 49 of them, by the way. So it was not a holiday for me, but it was still enjoyable. But when I got down there at night in my hotel room, and that one day in Versailles, and all the way back through northern France and Belgium and Holland and Germany, I had hours and hours to knit, and I wanted to make the most of that. So I knew I really had to bring a travel knit. But it was, I almost couldn't sleep for sort of wondering what should I bring. And I knew I wanted to use yarn from my stash too. You'd think it was like a question of national security or something really crucial. But it was for me. And also, of course, I wanted to be able to bring it, so I couldn't refer to a pattern, and I couldn't bring the Lamb and Kid colors because, first of all, that would mean 6 different balls of yarn, which, can you just see me sitting there at the front of the bus sort of juggling them? I couldn't see that. And also, I have begun to swatch for that, so it's coming up, but I'm still pondering so much which color to pair with what, which color should come after and stuff like that. So I need very much to focus and be in my own space for that and to have plenty of time. And I wouldn't be in that space for this. Even if I'd been home, I think I would still have wanted to have a simple knit right after this. You know, it's that sort of balance all the time. This one was challenging and complicated, so I wanted something that was a little easier. I'm sorry if the light changes here. I feel like it changes every now and then. It's the light outside, so I hope it's okay for you that I'm sitting here as well and not outside. Maybe I'll go outside again at some point, but the sun would be straight in my face right now. I worked early in the day, so I couldn't record then. But maybe later. Oh, by the way, when I came back from Paris, as I mentioned, I finished the hem of the Snow Crocus, and since I'd just been knitting with this, I could clearly feel that this was so much softer. Okay, so let me show you how far I've gotten with the Weekender. So this is as far as I've gotten. Actually, what I should do is turn it inside out, because that's what you're supposed to do at the end. You know, you're knitting it. I'm sure many of you have already knitted this, but you're knitting it, and then towards the end you turn it inside out. So it's reverse stockinette. So this is what it's going to look like. I've almost finished I think it's the front. So this is what I knitted. I think I knitted actually most of this hem in the garden of Versailles. And then almost all this bit up to where I separate for sleeves during the ride back in northern France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany. So that's what this is infused with. It reminds me of that trip. And it's pretty easy, but I've run into a few problems, which you can tell here on the back. This is these are almost floats. And that's because I've been knitting away, and I forget how many balls of yarn I've used so far. I can count. I'm on my 4th ball of yarn now, and as I said, I have 7 in all. So I should be good. I should be able to make long sleeves, shouldn't I? However, I'm not even sure if you can tell here. And I think it's not too bad, but when I changed, this is what I'm looking at when I'm knitting, of course, because it's on the knit side that I'm knitting. When I had knitted this bit for a while, suddenly I could see, and you can only see that once you've knitted a bit, I could see that the color was slightly different. And I'm like, what? How is this possible? I thought I had the same lots. Turns out all the ones I have left are different lot numbers. So the store that I bought them at had sold all the previous ones using different lots, and then there was just like a few left in each lot. So I have probably 4 different lots or 3 different lots at least here, which means that you can probably not really tell, but since it's kind of bright here, but some of these are definitely lighter than others, and you could tell. I don't know if you can tell. Yeah, maybe you can tell that this one is lighter. Certainly I could tell once I had knitted a bit. So, you know what to do. First I unraveled, then I took a close look at all the balls of yarn that I had and held them up against what I'd already knitted on. Thankfully there was, apparently, no problem with the ones I'd already used, but then I hadn't noticed anything either, which meant they were presumably pretty similar. So the one I'd used was darker. And then I found one more ball of yarn that was similar to that, and when I ran out of that one, what I did was I began with one strand of one that I knew was a little darker. Then I had a bit of the lighter one left. Yeah, I didn't run completely out. And then what I did was I pretended I was knitting color work. so that I knitted like 3 stitches with one color, 3 stitches with the other, 2 and then 2, and I did that all the way over, carried the yarn over, and then I think I did maybe 2 rows with one of them, 2 rows with the other, and then I continued that until I ran out of the lighter one, and then just kept knitting with the darker one so that the transition would hopefully be more or less seamless. So I hope that's gonna work out. So if I have the darker balls of yarn left for the sleeves, I think that's gonna be okay. That's not gonna look so strange, as long as it's not in the middle of the body or something, especially the front. Yeah, okay, so and as you can see clearly in my rain or smoky colored phase here. Yeah, I love this so much. I know for some reason, I don't know why they discontinued this color. I know what they have now is something that's a little more gray and something that's a little more blue. I think the blue is actually called hydrangea. Hydrangea. Hydrangea? I don't know. I'm pretty sure this is not the last time that I knit with the brush alpaca. Not just because it's affordable, but there's just something scrumptious about it. I really love it. It's so cozy and lovely. Oh, something that I've a modification. It's not a modification. Well, it is, but what I did was, I forget how much, but I think from the hem until you split for sleeves, I stopped 4 centimeters before, which is about, I don't know, almost 2 inch, no, a little over 2 inches. And the reason why is that I remember that this grew quite a bit because it's alpaca, it grew, but I didn't know that when I knitted this because it was like my 4th sweater or something like that. So I didn't know much about the yarns. I'm a little wiser now, still learning for sure. But I thought, well, I'll just stop a little before because it's probably going to grow a little after I wash and block it. And also, since I'm not super tall, then, I really don't want the garment to sort of swamp me. Okay, so I think that's that when it comes to the weekender, because of course I haven't finished it. I'm still knitting on it, and it's really nice to knit on. Yeah, for me, it's that balance between being challenged and then just being able to, there's a little bit of something going on, because now I'm up here and I'll have to, I think, bind off for the neck. I'm not sure. I don't remember because I presumably have to leave the cable on here and then continue with the back. And then I think I joined them with the 3-needle bind off where the seam is on the outside so you can see it. Yeah, so these knits, the colors that I have in this particular podcast are certainly not very fall inspired. So I'm sorry about that, but thankfully you can find many other videos where people are very much into fall colors. So am I. I just happen to be knitting on garments where I'm using yarns of different colors. I suspect it'll change along the way. One thing that I've also concluded is that I think I've said this before, I need more lightweight garments. I need more transitional pieces because it looks like, I don't know, it seems as if the hotter weather is here to stay. Certainly when I was in Paris and we had hot weather down there, they also had really hot weather here in Denmark, which is unusual for this time of year. So all the really heavy sweaters with thick wool, well, I'm not going to be able to use them as much. And also, my own personal thermostat is a bit higher, I have to say. So I need lightweight pieces more. So, of course I'm going to use the yarn that I have, but going forward, I think I'm going to think about that when I buy yarn. I say that now, and really when I buy yarn, I buy the yarn that I think is most beautiful. Okay, so what I'm going to insert now is the tiny clip from Paris where I visited the yarn shop, because then I can show you my acquisitions. It was difficult to decide what to buy in there because suddenly you're there for, I was there for maybe 10 minutes while all the guests that I was in charge of were going up into the Eiffel Tower. And I knew I wasn't really going to go up. For one thing, I've been up the Eiffel Tower before. For another, I have a fear of heights. For another, I just wanted a brief moment to myself. So I took the metro up to this yarn shop called Little Weasel, which is in a passage north of the Seine. And it was smaller than I thought, partly because I only saw the second half of it right before I left. But still, once you're in a yarn shop, you have a limited amount of time. But you also know you're in Paris and you really want souvenir yarn. You're sort of a little pressed for time. And there was a part of me that said, you don't actually need to buy anything just because you're in a yarn shop in a foreign country. No need. You've got plenty of yarn at home. And then another part of me said, are you kidding? You have an option now to buy yarn that you can't get at home. Better make the most of it and buy something that you'll remember forever because you bought it in Paris. So, of course, I did that. So I don't have my microphone with me and it's excruciatingly hot here. I'm not even sure you'll be able to hear me, but I'm savoring my last minutes in a little park on the westernmost tip of the little island that the Notre Dame is located on, in the very center of Paris. And I just wanted to show you the yarn that I bought at Little Weasel. The colorway is called Water Lilies, which I thought was appropriate because I know that Claude has a painting called Water Lilies, or in French, and it's located here in Paris, and it just had a French vibe to it. Also, I just thought they were scrumptious. So this is my last evening in Paris, and of course you won't see it until I'm home again. This is how it turned into a watercolor theme. I didn't think of it at all. What I was most drawn to was the La Bien-Aimée yarns that were displayed on a table in front of me, and I felt completely drawn to several of them. There was the very light pink called Pink Fetty, I think. I didn't buy that one, although I could easily have bought that one as well. I was sort of irrationally, almost childishly drawn to another color in the same base that I bought when I was in New York. So clearly I'm drawn to that. So you've already seen me show you this yarn sitting on a bench in Paris. I'll just show it to you here again in case you didn't see it clearly. And as I also mentioned, it's the color is called Water Lilies, which, as I mentioned, reminds me of Claude Monet, his Water Lilies. And I first saw that in a museum in Paris many years ago. So it was just, it reminded me of Paris. And this is so soft. The Cashmerino. It's 75% superwash merino and 15% cashmere, 10% nylon. So it's superwash. But if there's one thing that I've noticed, it's that the sweaters I wear the most are the ones that are softest because of my skin. So I have to take that into consideration. Yeah, it's got mint, light blue, a little bit of light pink. And it's just a crazy color, but very, to me, playful yet peaceful, if that makes sense. I've already thought about what to knit with these. I've got several contenders. I don't think I'm going to be knitting it anytime soon because it's fingering weight, so it's probably not going to be a very thick garment unless I pair it with a mohair. I've been thinking about that. And I've also been thinking, what color mohair should I choose? I have a little bit of leftover. I would need to buy more, but a very light, off-white, pale rose color. Isea silk mohair. Isea silk mohair is definitely the softest on my skin. But I was also thinking that you could sort of up the game with the blue here. And when I bought that extra skein of apple mint, which it's called, this one, apple mint silk mohair from Momonoke yarn. Oh, by the way, I didn't even mention it, but the other one is called lavender. There was, I just took a look at the other colors, and there was one that I was very drawn towards. Again, clearly in a smoky blue watercolory phase here. And it was this one called Silver. I mean, I could make a whole sweater just using this kind of yarn. I love this color so much. And I was thinking that you could also pair that. I'm not sure. Maybe looking at it here they look similar. On camera, this looks very dark. It's not actually that dark because I wouldn't want to take out the lightness of this, or I wouldn't want this to become darker. So, several options. There's also the option just to knit a fingering weight garment and not add mohair, which I would actually prefer because then I wouldn't have that extra heat. But it's difficult for me to find fingering weight patterns that I enjoy. And I'm a little afraid to make a DK weight pattern using fingering weight yarn because I will probably have to do quite a bit of math for the fit to become right. And also 2 skeins is probably not enough. And I just wasn't indulgent enough to buy 3. So I will share with you the 2 or 3 patterns that I have considered. And probably it might be something completely different altogether. But I've thought of knitting the ranunculus with it, with or without mohair. And having just knitted a Midori Hiroshi pattern, I think I would like to try more of her patterns. Of course, ranunculus has been knitted by everybody, pretty much. So it's not very adventurous, but it's still beautiful. And I think this one would look beautiful with that sort of jewelly kind of yoke. There's another pattern that I really like. It's by Joanna Ang. It's called Fairy Bouquet. I think it's really beautiful. I think her patterns are really beautiful. There are several of her sweaters that I'd like to knit. I've thought about that as well. The pattern already has that sort of ethereal vibe to it, which I think would be underlined with this yarn. However, I'm also afraid that the small speckles here, and I'm not really hugely into speckles, but here I just thought they were adorable. I'm not sure if they would ruin that sweater, if it would become too dainty or something. I'm not sure. And the final one I've got on my list is one by, let me just check, is one by Irene Lynn called the Flora Sweater. She's got some beautiful sweaters as well. So, those 3 so far are contenders, but I would have to add mohair, silk mohair for them, probably, at least for the last 2. I'm not sure for the ranunculus. So if you have any ideas or any comments on that, I would certainly welcome them. So you can see that the watercolory phase continued with these, and I love them so much. So it's, I kind of want to cast on something with this now, but maybe it's a little more wintry or even springy. So they will have to wait also because, as per usual, there are other things lined up. Something else that I bought in this yarn shop, and this is really strange because I've been writing a little with a woman called Marion. Hi, Marion, who lives in France, but is moving back to the UK. So she wrote to ask me if I wanted some of her Knit Pro needles because she had to clear out a lot of stuff and had other needles. And I said, well, that's very kind of you, sure. I'm missing these sizes. So she sent off a little package to me that arrived the day before I was back home, which means the day that I was in the yarn shop in Paris, the package arrived home. And in the yarn shop, I bought a little stitch marker. This little thing. I couldn't resist. And of course, interestingly, all the guests were up in the Eiffel Tower when I bought this. Amazingly, Marion had included the very same stitch marker in the package for me. That was just so, I don't know, some kind of synchronicity I felt. And she had included this beautiful skein of yarn called Titicaca in this pale rose color. That's right up my alley. And it's 80% extra fine merino and 15% nylon. So this may just have to be the yarn for my first pair of socks in 25 years. Or maybe something else, maybe something for my neck because it's super soft. I really love it. I should be able to make something nice out of this. Marion also included this lovely little project bag for me, which I have to say is my very first project bag. I've only used regular bags so far because, I don't know, when I first started watching knitting podcasts sometime, maybe a year and a half ago, I was like, what's with all the project bags? Is that a must-have? And I'm like, surely I can just use some of my bags. And of course, now I've been eyeing some of the project bags, but I would probably want something pretty simple. And this one is it's a drawstring bag made by a dyer in France. And Marion also included soap and a little piece of cloth that she'd knitted. So it still smells of the soap, which was also rose colored and in the shape of a rose. So I think I'm just going to put this in here. And this would be perfect for whatever project I decide on with this yarn. So thank you so much, Marion. That was really kind of you and lovely. And a really nice surprise when I got back from Paris. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to show you that I used this particular kind of cable needle for the cables in the Snow Crocus. I haven't really gotten around to learning how to make cables without a cable needle, and I have no great desire to make cables without a cable needle because this does the trick for me, and it's not something that takes a lot of time to me. I'd like to know how to do it without the needle, simply to know how to do it, because it's nice to be able to do lots of different things, but I'm not sure I would replace the cable needle. So maybe a little something about what sparks joy. Well, all of the above certainly sparks joy. A visit to Paris in September certainly sparked joy, even though it was hard work. But I had a lot of help from the bus driver, who was just a delight. He was funny. He had a really dry sense of humor. He was really helpful, and just he knew Paris like the back of his hand. So sometimes he would just sort of drive really slowly and say, why don't you tell everybody to look up between those two buildings right now? And I'd be going, and if you look up between these two buildings, and I didn't even know what was coming, and everybody would be going, it would be the Eiffel Tower or the Arc de Triomphe or whatever. So it was just, such a lot of support this time round, which when I went last year, it was a lot tougher. I made, actually, if you're interested, I made 2 videos from my trip last year where I take you around with me and show you what we saw in Paris, what I showed to the guests. And of course, for me, it's always a delight to be in Paris. It's one of the first cities that I ever visited. It's the first city I ever visited on my own when I was like 19 or so, and I took the train down there. So it still has some very special memories for me. And now I've been there as a knitter too, which I love. So Paris definitely sparked quite a lot of joy, but also the Indian summer that we're having. Or last week, it's not even Indian summer, which I take to be somewhere between summer and fall. It's been summer, regular summer. And it's interesting because I've always really loved the fall or autumn. My birthday is in October, so I've always felt drawn to autumn. But since I live in Denmark, and since I know that the long dark winter is coming, it's also a delight to have a few more weeks of summer, especially since in July summer was clearly cancelled. The weather's been so much better in August and September, so that has brought some joy. Although it has to be said that the cooler temperatures are also welcome now, especially because I live in a wooden house and the upper floor where I sleep become really hot, as I think I've probably mentioned before. Somebody asked me, have you ever frogged? And I take frogged to mean frogged a whole project in its entirety. No, I haven't. But I have the very first sweater I ever knitted was too small when I was done with it. because I didn't swatch back then. And of course, I had no knowledge of how tightly I knitted, apparently tighter than the designer. So I gave that away. I could have frogged and knitted it again in a bigger size or with a bigger needle. But of course, when you're done with the whole garment, I don't know. To me, that would have been like, oh, I've wasted all this energy, all this time, and now I will have nothing to show for it. So I gave it to my aunt. So I've never frogged an entire garment. Everything that I've knitted that I didn't like or didn't fit or that was too scratchy, I've so far given away. I just gave away a top a few weeks ago to a friend, but she gave it back to me because it was too scratchy for her too. And that's the Duo yarn by Signet Garn, which is actually 50% wool and 50% cotton, so still too scratchy, and she doesn't even have particularly sensitive skin. But no, I've never frogged an entire garment, and I think this time round, that's the advantage of knitting top down. I try to put on the garments during the knitting so I can tell, do I have to rip back, because I do that a lot. I rip back if I think this is too tight or this is too baggy or there's something here that doesn't look right. The yarn is a different color or whatever. So I'm not afraid of doing that, and I don't mind it, because if you do that, if you're willing to do that and then modify as you go along, you're likely to have a better fit once you're done. So I accept that that's part of the process. Let me just briefly mention something about the Nordic Knitalong in a minute. But before that, let me just also say that I know that my uploads here are all over the place. They're not very systematic, and I don't suspect they ever will be, because I just don't know when I'll have time to record. I need pretty much an empty house for that. I also don't know, if I sit outside, don't know what the weather is going to be like. And every now and then, when I've been sort of, okay, I've recorded, now I just have to edit, and I will get the video out on a Sunday night, for instance. Well, then every time I do that, and I say that, the editing takes so much longer. The more extra clips and photos and voiceovers and text I add, the longer it takes to edit. It's like the editing program has to process a lot more, and it just takes forever sometimes. I've been up to 2 days for something to upload. So, a video I thought was going to be out, or podcast that I thought was going to be out Sunday night maybe ends up coming out Wednesday night. So there it is. And also, I want to have something substantial to show you, and not just where I'm at in my weekender and then nothing else to show you. I want to have something, I hope it's substantial enough to show you, so that there's something for you here. I like that myself, which means that, of course, a few weeks have to go by where I can work on it. And I don't necessarily always have that time. It depends on what my weeks look like. I try to knit every day. In Paris, it wasn't always possible, but it's going to probably be a while until I take another trip as a travel guide. So I will have time now, I think. Somebody also asked me what podcasts I watch, and I'm hesitant to mention what I watch because I'm so afraid of forgetting people. What's the phrase? None mentioned, none forgotten. So first of all, let me say that I watch a lot of different podcasts. Apropos Quiet House. Now it is no longer one. Getting back to what I was talking about. I'm almost at the end here. I was asked what podcast do I watch, and I can understand that question because I'm very curious about that as well. I don't watch every episode of every podcast because that would simply take too much time. And I'm also careful not to watch podcasts all the time, probably because I make podcasts myself. And for me, it's easy to fall into the trap of comparing and worrying whether I'm doing a good enough job. Am I showing enough? And this is not. I'm not angling for comments that I'm doing a good enough job. Although, of course, I appreciate it when you give me positive comments. But it really is something where you have to be careful. Some people have written to me previously to say that they had also begun a podcast or a YouTube channel, and they had to stop because there were just too many opinions, and they started worrying about doing a good enough job. And that risk is just always there when we put ourselves out there. And so I have to sometimes pretend that whole community isn't there, and just simply do my own thing, which is the only sensible way of doing anything, actually, to pretend that there's going to be no judgment, that you're not doing it to be deemed okay as a human being. You're doing it to share and for the love of it. I do take breaks from podcasts every now and then, but there are some that I watch regularly. I don't know what it's going to be like in the future, but for now and for a while, the ones that I've watched regularly are Jackie and Carmen from Knitting a Good Yarn. I mean, they're my friends, basically. And I used to watch Cadyjaxknits regularly. Unfortunately, they don't produce as many podcasts now that Caitlin no longer lives in Wisconsin. And I'm sure that there are a lot of us that miss their podcasts, but I find them very inspiring. And they're also people that I feel I can relate to. I don't know what it takes for me to be able to relate to somebody, but I think I watch podcasts both for their knitting content and for the people behind it. It's a mix of different things, and I find it very inspiring. And I think one of the difficult things is to sometimes find knitting podcasts where we share pretty much the same taste or aesthetic. And thankfully, there's so many different options out there. I also watch Knit Together with Kim and Jonna a lot. Oh, of course, I watch The Grocery Girls. I watch The Grocery Girls because I consider them my friends. They have no idea who I am, but I think they're always good company, and I feel so uplifted by them. You know, they're funny and they have knitting content, and they're good people. And then there are also a few others that I think I'll mention them as I move on. But one of the things that I've noticed is that, which you will have noticed as well, that these consist of two people, and I'm out here on my own, and as are many of the other podcasters that I watch more or less regularly. So I think it's tricky to be doing this on your own. I wish sometimes I had somebody else to do it with. That would be fun. But there it is. And I think one of the reasons why it also takes a while for me to settle on certain podcasts or any podcast, any show, is that for me, I feel I connect to the people. And it's like when you meet people in real life. It takes a little while for somebody like me, at any rate, to connect to people. Simply because, this is sort of like a friendship. You enter into some kind of transactional contract here where you give your time, just like you're doing right now, and they give you theirs. And it's not always necessarily casual. It's casual, but it's also meaningful. There are tons of other podcasts that I watch. And, if it's okay with you, I think I'll just mention them as we move along. And finally, a little word on the Nordic Knitalong. I was just thinking, if you're on the fence about being part of the Nordic Knitalong, that's completely fine. You've still got plenty of time. But maybe give this one a chance. If you're into huge boxy sweaters, you don't have to make it huge. You can make it smaller. But how about this wide ribbing at the bottom there? I love that. It's from one of the Sandnes catalogs, the one that the Guernsey Genser is in as well, which I knitted as well, and which I completely love. I think the Amy slipover that quite a few people have knitted is also in that particular catalog or book or whatever, magazine. I'm not always so diligent about checking into the group. I do every now and then when I remember. It's simply because I forget. But the group is up and running on Ravelry, and the hashtag is up and running on Instagram. I would love for you to join us. It's completely casual. All you have to do is knit something that you consider Nordic, be it the choice of yarn or the pattern or both. And, plenty of options out there. You can do a really elaborate Icelandic colorwork sweater, or you can do a really simple petite knit pattern in one color, or something completely different. In some of the other videos in the show notes, the previous 2 videos, I think, I added quite a few Nordic designers. But as somebody also told me, you can actually filter your search on Ravelry for by country. So you can choose the Nordic countries, including the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland, which might yield something really new and surprising for you. So if you're up for maybe a little challenge or something new or something cozy, maybe you should knit something Nordic. And I know I haven't been very good on that note myself. I've knitted something Japanese, now I'm knitting on something American by American designer, Japanese designer, but I will get back to some of the Nordic designers and also have knitted a few recently, so I consider them part of it. And let's see what the future holds. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be quite a few Nordic knits, but also one or two other new projects that are going to be really exciting that are not necessarily Nordic. As I said, I've begun swatching for with the Lamb and Kid yarn, and I'm really excited about that. And I hope that's coming up next. And when I say hope, it's because you're not completely in control of the creative process always. You've got one thing lined up and then suddenly something takes your fancy. But I'm pretty sure that once I've finished the Weekender, maybe even alongside it, I'll be knitting on the pattern where I use the Lamb and Kid, and then doing the Weekender when I need a little sort of peace of mind, because obviously the Lamb and Kid one is a colorwork project. So I think that's that for me today. I thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope the weather's clement wherever you are. I hope it's not too extreme. So I hope you're safe and happy and have some wonderful knits to work on that give you joy and comfort. I hope you're able to find things in your life, in your part of the world, that you can appreciate so that those things can belong to you as well. And again, if you feel like sharing what you're knitting on, I would love to hear it. I think it's always really inspiring, and it may inspire other people's in the thread as well. And any comments or questions, feel free to share or ask. And I thank you so much for being here. It's been a joy to talk to you again, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you next time. Bye for now.